Hello guys and welcome back to FatbossTV. Today we're having a look at another boss from the Legion Alpha, which is Tichondrius from the Nighthold.
Yes, this lore-heavy boss seems to be the fifth one in the instance according to the Dungeon Journal, and it is a two-phase fight where the boss just keeps alternating between like a long phase 1 and then like a short phase 2.
This encounter is mainly to do with debuff management, and I'd argue probably positioning. There's various different mechanics that sort of interact with one another, and if you're positioned in the incorrect place, you're going to wipe very, very quickly. And there's also an aspect of ad control that you need to deal with. And before we go into any of those mechanics, it's probably a good idea to talk about the boss's model. It does appear to be a placeholder.
Yeah, it said when you teleported to him that it was a placeholder, so it might look nicer one day. I think it looks alright now already,
yeah.
Apart from when he turns white for no reason. But yeah, it's pretty good, but it might look better later on.
So anyway, let's kick straight into this and let's talk about the encounter in phase 1. So, like we said, it's all about debuffs. The boss will debuff random players with something called Carrion Plague. This is simply just a dot that lasts for 40 seconds and deals a moderate amount of damage. However, the boss will also cast something called Seeker Swarm, and this just deals flat damage to all players that have the Carrion Plague. But this will also deal damage to anyone between the player that has the Carrion Plague and the boss. And if you do get hit, it'll also apply Carrion Plague to them as well. And this debuff does a lot of fucking damage, and if a lot of people have it, you're going to wipe very, very quickly. When you're hit by Seeker Swarm, it also refreshes the duration of your Carrion Plague, which means it's going to last the entire phase 1 because this ability just comes in so frequently, you in fact can only drop it during phase 2.
So as soon as anyone gets Carrion Plague, those players need to position so that they will be the only ones hit when this Seeker Swarm comes in. We decided to have all players with the Plague stand on one side of the room, spread out slightly from one another to make sure they don't take extra damage from each other's Seeker Swarm damage lines that are coming in. The main reason we did this was just to make sure that the Carrion Plague wouldn't spread to any extra players in the raid. If it just goes on even a couple extra players, it's so much extra healing and there's already a lot going out, so your healers will fall behind. Another reason we have our plagued players stand on the left is to gain distance from another mechanic called Brand of Argus. Now, Tichondrius will mark several players with a permanent debuff. This debuff doesn't actually do any ticking damage or anything, it just places a circle around you. However, when a clump of players move within the circle, it will explode, dealing a large amount of raid damage and knocking back anyone within 8 yards. This will also remove the debuff. Now importantly, the damage that you take from this raid-wide explosion is reduced the further away you are from it, and it does drop off really, really big. If you're like 20 yards away from the explosion, you'll take a fair amount of damage, but if you start going to like 30 and 40, you just take less and less and less, and it's super important that you do that. Now, one thing is that this debuff cannot apply to players with the Carrion Plague debuff unless, of course, there's no other targets. This allows you to have all of the players with the Plague a really good amount of distance away from the explosion at all times, and considering they're taking a shit ton of ticking damage as well, it's good that they're far away, because otherwise you're just going to get comboed and absolutely destroyed.
Now, it's very, very important that you actually remove these brand debuffs quickly, because the boss keeps applying new sets almost all the time, and there are set points within the encounter that you do need to stack up. And if you have everyone stack up, then they're just going to all explode at the exact same time, which is almost certainly going to be a wipe, especially when you're very, very close to the explosions. So when they are applied, the way that we were doing it is that we would just have our raid call out which one they were going to explode first. We'd have a group of players just say, yeah, left one or right one next or whatever. We'd have some downtime in between, let people get topped up, and then we'd explode the last one. And then the idea is, if you do it quick enough, you should be able to explode them so there's no brands out, and then you have like, what, 10 seconds or 5 seconds until the next brands do come in. When we were actually going through the process of exploding these players, generally we just sort of did it wherever it spawned on them. I guess you could form some form of strategy where those players actually move out and then you have designated people run and stand on top of them. I don't know, maybe like a group of hunters and you can like det it or something. But we really didn't feel like it was necessary when it does hit live servers, and probably on Mythic, because on Mythic when they explode they spawn fire. This is fire that you probably want to have around the edges. That is probably when you would implement a strat like that.
Now, the boss also casts Feast of Blood. This is a debuff that will go on the tank that increases their physical damage taken by 15%, but it also summons 3 tainted blood ads that will fixate on that tank. Now, these ads need to be killed off as soon as possible. They hurt an absolute ton, they have a ton of HP, and they do come in quite frequently. However, you cannot kill these ads right next to the boss due to Tichondrius' vampiric aura. This just makes it so any ads within 30 yards get a buff that will make it so their melee attacks heal them for 400% of the damage dealt. Now these tainted blood ads, if they are within the aura, you're going to really struggle to even dent their health pool before it just bounces straight back up from all of the self-healing that they're doing. So what we did in order to kill the ads, we just had the tank who got the debuff drag the ads 30 yards away from the boss so they would be outside of the aura, whilst the other tank just taunt the boss to keep the boss in position. We then had all of the DPS just switch to them and kill them off as soon as possible. Now these ads can be stunned, so you may be able to kill them within the aura if you have like some form of CC rotation. However, if that was to fail, you'd lose a lot of time because they'll just heal up all the damage you did to them, so it probably isn't worth it.
Now the last ability that you have to deal with in this phase is something called Echoes of the Void. This is just a channeled cast that deals high ticking damage every half second for 8 seconds, and towards the end of the channel, it's dealing even more damage than it did at the start. It just ramps up, and it deals a fucking shit ton. However, when the boss does cast this ability, he also spawns 4 crystals that create line of sight, and if you do stand behind them, you take no damage whatsoever. But one really interesting thing to note about these pillars is that it appears that the more players that are behind them, the quicker they despawn. So the idea is that you sort of split your raid into 4 separate groups just to prevent any crystals from dying too early. This didn't seem like an issue whatsoever on the testing we were doing. We actually just had like half the raid behind one crystal and then like the group of the carrion plague people on the other one, and it was never an issue whatsoever. But on live servers, once this is probably fixed or tuned however they want it to work, is likely that that would be the case, and you would need to split your raid up into 4 separate groups. This is the main mechanic that sort of affects the brand of Argus, and this is the reason why you want the brands to explode before this phase starts, because if you go into this phase and blow up all the brands that you forgot to blow up beforehand, you're going to wipe very, very quickly.
And be knocked back and take even ticking damage from that as well.
Yeah.
So it's just generally awful. Make sure you keep on top of those brands.
Now, once the boss has rotated through a load of those mechanics from phase 1, eventually he will go to phase 2.
Now, phase 2 starts with the boss casting something called Illusionary Night. This will place all the players in the raid in like a different phase, it's like a horrific illusion or some shit, for around 30 seconds. During this time, the boss will no longer refresh your carrion plague, allowing it to drop off the entire raid, so your healers can take a little bit of a break. Now, whilst you are inside the illusion, you have to deal with a couple of mechanics. One of them is Carrion Nightmare. Now, Tichondrius will reappear at the side of the room and send out a green line which will explode shortly afterwards. Anyone hit by this blast will take some damage and will be stunned for 3 seconds. You do have more than enough time to move from this beam, just do keep an eye out for it because it does come in pretty frequently, and really you should be focusing on killing the ads. Now these ads are called Phantasmal Blood Fangs, and they just spawn quicker and quicker and quicker throughout the phase, and all they do is just melee hit whoever they got threat on. However, when they do die, they drop like a shadow orb, and if a player runs over it, they'll gain a buff that increases their damage and healing done by 30%, as well as give them 2% increased mana regen. Now this buff lasts throughout the entire of this like inside illusionary night phase, and it also lasts an additional 30 seconds when you leave the phase. Now it's entirely up to you who you want to put the buff on. There are quite a lot of ads, and if you can kill them quick enough, you should be able to get quite a lot of buffs. We found the fight was pretty healing intensive, so we did try to prioritize our healers when we could get into that phase, but the thing is, it's very easy to accidentally pick one of these orbs up. Like if an ad dies on top of you, you'll pretty much instantly absorb the shadow orb and get the buff. So melee DPS, you need to be extra careful if you did want to prioritize someone else over the melee.
Now after 30 seconds of being in this phase, the phase will end and everyone will then enter back into phase 1 and you'll be back into the same room, and the fight just continues as normal. However, every time the boss exits phase 2 and begins phase 1 again, you'll have to deal with new types of ads. Now we only ever came across this a couple of times, we didn't have much time testing this, we were playing around with other things, so we didn't really get to see the ads that many times. But the first time that he leaves phase 2, he'll begin to summon these ads called Nightborn Spell Guards. All these guys do is just hit the tank really fucking hard. They apply a debuff that increases the tank's damage taken for 8 seconds. It just stacks up and up and up. And when the debuff drops, that tank will also spawn like a void zone underneath them. If you stand in that, you can take a load of ticking damage. So this is going to be even more deadly on Mythic because you'll already have fire all around the room. You'll also have to dodge void zones, so you're going to have to try and place these somewhere. And because of the nature of that, it's probably a good idea to kill these ads off as soon as possible. They're probably even more important than the vampiric ads, just because you're just going to limit the amount of room you have.
Yeah, and it's really important as well that you can't just tank these wherever, because they're going to benefit from the vampiric aura as well.
Exactly, yeah.
So if they're going to be welling on the tank, hitting the tank for millions or whatever, and they're just going to heal all of that back up, 400%, lovely. So yeah, as Lol said, we did only get to see these once or twice, and every time we saw them was already kind of wiping, but we did see loads of pretty clouds on the floor, but they did really fucking hurt. Now, one ad that we didn't actually get to see that I did want to talk about very, very briefly is the second time the boss comes out of phase 2, he starts spawning Sightless Watchers. They're quite interesting because they apply a hard-hitting dot that can only go on healers. And the thing is that it drains mana every tick as well. And it's a lot of mana that it takes away from you. It's like 77k. And when you dispel it, the healer explodes, dealing like 1,000,000 damage to anyone nearby. So when this guy is up, I guess you'd need to have all of your healers pre-spread out. And, like, you got to remember that there's already, like, you got the Carrion Plague group, and you've got all of the fucking Void Zones, and on Mythic you're going to have Fire. So the healers need to find somewhere to stay 8 yards away from everyone else, just so you can instantly dispel them, so they don't blow up on everyone.
So yeah, it's a complete mess.
Yeah, whether or not you'll be fighting these ads and the Nightborn at the same time, I really hope they don't make us do that. But yeah, I think we can say that towards the end of the fight, this is going to get pretty fucking chaotic. But yeah, that was the encounter. That's all we did get to see. And overall, it was definitely interesting.
Yeah, it's not a terrible fight. I think it's a little bit interesting that they decided to place Tichondrius so early within the instance. And even though it's not a terrible fight, it is quite simple. It is arguably maybe a little bit on the bland side. But considering he's so important within, like, WoW lore and everything, you thought that the fight would have some form of, like, impact.
Yeah, I thought it would be probably a bit more exciting.
Bit
yeah, exactly. Like, even, like, the inside phase, I was like, oh, this is going to be like Lich King in the Frostmourne, and that's, like, all cool. But really, all it does, it doesn't teleport you anywhere. It just kind of makes the room a bit fuzzy. And I was kind of like,
yeah.
Like, you could do, like, an Archimon thing, take us to the Twisting Nether or something for a little bit. But no, there is none of that, which is a little bit disappointing. But, of course, I'm pretty sure Tichondrius can't die in the main world. I think that's lore anyway. But so probably we'll have to kill him about 8 more times in the game before he probably dies anyway. So this is just his first form, and it's a bit of a shit fight. But the thing is, one thing that I did think that could be improved maybe is how Seeker's Swarm animation shows.
Oh yeah, it's not obvious at all. It's really difficult to see exactly, not so much who is debuffed, but, like, it's difficult to see the line between them and the boss.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it would be like a line of, like, shit coming towards you, and you wouldn't be able to avoid it, but at least it'll visually show how the mechanic works. Right now, it's just kind of like bats kind of go towards your area.
It looks like a cone.
Yeah, it's like a cone, and it's really, really unclear. So I think that could be much better if they just, like, put a line of bats coming towards you or whatever you wanted to do, just to make it so it's a bit more clear to people who haven't seen any videos or anything on it.
Yeah.
They can see, oh shit, bad stuff is going towards those players, make sure I don't stand there.
Another thing to add is that I'd say that the orbs inside during phase 2, I think it would be a lot better if they, like, you click on them and you just get like an extra, well, you wouldn't get an extra action button, but if you click on them, that would give you the buff instead of you running over them, because like you pointed out, the whole thing with the melee DPS, if you're killing the bats as melee and it dies, well, you pick up the orb and you could potentially fuck over other people in your raid that would benefit from it better, such as a healer if you're low on mana or whatever.
Well, yeah, and it's really easy because it's not exactly like you can easily place yourself, especially with, like, the lines of shit going through the middle of the room. Sometimes you need to move through the ads, and if it happens to die at that point, you could easily screw over the healers, as you said. So, yeah, there's a couple of little things that they do need to improve, and the thing is, the fight itself is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. I think it's because it has Tichondrius' name added to it that everyone's just like, oh, it's going to be amazing, it's going to be all this, and it's okay, but I don't think it's probably worthy of the boss name.
But thank you very much for watching, guys. If you did enjoy this little preview, then please do drop us down a like, and we shall see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.